The letter was 3 sentences long, 3 sentences written by a man serving life without parole for murder, 3 sentences that made James Brown stop his performance, walk off the stage, and sit on the floor of Sing prison with his head in his hands, sobbing. The band didn't know what to do. The guards didn't know what to do. And 1,500 inmates sat in complete silence, watching the hardest working man in show business completely break down. 2 weeks earlier, James Brown's manager Ben Bart had received an unusual request. The warden of Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York, wanted to know if James would consider performing for the inmates. It would be a short set, maybe 45 minutes, in the prison cafeteria. No payment, just a chance to bring some light into one of America's toughest maximum security prisons. Ben's first instinct was to say no. Sing housed some of the most violent criminals in the country, murderers, armed robbers, men who'd committed crimes so brutal they'd never see freedom again. The idea of putting James in a locked room with 1,500 of these men seemed insane. But when Ben mentioned it to James, almost as a joke, James didn't laugh. "Tell them yes," he said immediately. "James, these aren't your usual fans. These are dangerous men. They're still men, Ben, and everybody deserves music." On March 3, 1968, James Brown and his band drove through the massive gates of Sing. The prison sat right on the Hudson River, its grey stone walls looking more like a medieval fortress than a modern correctional facility. As they drove deeper into the complex, passing through checkpoint after checkpoint, James could feel his band getting nervous. "Boss, you sure about this?" asked his guitarist, Jimmy Nolan, looking out at the guard towers and razor wire. James nodded, but he wasn't entirely sure. He'd performed in a lot of places, but never behind prison walls, never for an audience that couldn't leave if they wanted to. The warden, a stern man named Vincent Mancusi, met them at the final security checkpoint. "Mr. Brown, I appreciate you doing this, but I need to be clear about the rules. You'll be performing in the cafeteria. There will be armed guards at every exit. If anything goes wrong, misstepping at all, you follow our guards' instructions immediately. These men are unpredictable." James shook his hand. "Warden, I understand, but I'm not here to judge these men. I'm here to give them something they don't get much of in here." The prison cafeteria had been transformed as much as possible. The tables had been pushed to the sides to create an open space. A small stage had been set up at one end, just some risers and a few microphones. It wasn't the Apollo Theater, but it would work. As the inmates filed in, James watched from a side door. They came in single file, hands visible, guards watching their every move. Most were young, shockingly young, in their 20s or 30s. Some had tattoos covering their arms, some had scars on their faces. All of them had the same look in their eyes, a hardness that came from living in a place where showing weakness could get you killed. They sat on the floor, filling every inch of available space. 1,500 men, packed into a cafeteria designed for maybe 800. The room was dead, silent, except for the shuffle of feet and the occasional cough. Nobody talked. Nobody made eye contact. They just waited. James stood backstage, if you could call the cafeteria kitchen backstage, and felt something he rarely felt before a performance: genuine fear. Not of the audience, exactly, but of failing them. These men had nothing. No freedom, no futures, no hope. For 45 minutes, he was going to try to give them something, and he had no idea if it would work. At exactly 2 p.m., James walked out onto that makeshift stage. The reaction was instant and electric. 1,500 inmates erupted in applause and cheers, not the polite applause of a regular audience, but something rawer, more desperate. These men were starving for anything that reminded them of the outside world, and James Brown represented everything they'd lost. James grabbed the microphone. "Sing, sing," he called out. "Are you all ready for some music?" The roar that came back was deafening. He launched into "I Got You, I Feel Good," and the transformation was immediate. Men who'd been sitting stone-faced moments before were suddenly on their feet, moving, clapping, singing along. Guards who'd been tense and ready for trouble visibly relaxed as they watched the crowd lose themselves in the music. For 30 minutes, James gave it everything he had. He did his signature moves, the splits, the spins, the famous footwork. He sang "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag," and "Think," and "Please, Please, Please," and the inmates gave it right back to him, screaming, dancing, completely lost in the moment. Then, during a brief pause between songs, something unexpected happened. An inmate in the front row stood up. He was maybe 35 years old, with graying hair and a scar across his left cheek. He was holding something, the folded piece of paper. Guards immediately moved toward him, hands on their batons. Standing up without permission during a prison event was a violation. But the man didn't make any aggressive moves. He just held out that piece of paper toward the stage. "Mr. Brown," he called out, his voice rough but steady. "Sir, please, I need you to read this." The room went silent. Every guard was now focused on this one inmate. Every other prisoner was watching to see what would happen. This could go bad very quickly. James held up his hand to the guards. "Hold on," he said. Then to the inmate, "What's your name, brother?" "Marcus, sir." "Marcus Coleman." "What you got there, Marcus?" "A letter, Mr. Brown. I wrote it this morning. I need you to read it." "Please." James looked at the guards. The warden, standing in the back, gave a small nod. "It's okay." James walked to the edge of the stage and bent down. Marcus Coleman handed him the folded paper, his hand shaking slightly. The handwriting was rough, like someone who hadn't done much writing in a long time. But the words were clear. He read the first sentence silently, then the second, then the third, and everything changed. James's hands started shaking. His eyes filled with tears. He tried to compose himself, tried to maintain that James Brown persona, but he couldn't. The letter had broken through every wall he'd built around his emotions. He looked up at Marcus Coleman, who was standing there with tears streaming down his face. Then James looked out at the other 1,499 inmates, many of whom were now leaning forward, trying to understand what was happening. James's voice cracked as he spoke. "Marcus wrote this letter to me, and he asked me to read it out loud. I'm going to do that, if that's okay with all of you." The room was so quiet you could hear the guards' radios crackling in the background. James cleared his throat and began reading. "Mr. Brown, 20 years ago, I killed a man during a robbery. His name was Thomas Wright. He was 42 years old. He had a wife and 3 children. For 20 years I told myself I didn't care. I told myself he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But 6 months ago, I heard your song. It's a man's world on the prison radio, and for the first time since I pulled that trigger, I cried. I cried because your music made me remember that Thomas Wright was a man, just like me. He had dreams, just like me. He had people who loved him, just like I did before I threw my life away. Your music gave me back my humanity, Mr. Brown, and now I can finally say what I should have said 20 years ago. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. By the time James finished reading, tears were pouring down his face. He tried to wipe them away, tried to keep performing, but he couldn't. The weight of what he'd just read, the weight of Marcus Coleman's confession, his redemption, his pain, was too much. James walked off the stage, not gracefully, not as part of any planned performance, but like a man who simply couldn't hold himself up anymore. He sat down on the floor of that prison cafeteria, put his head in his hands, and sobbed. The band stood frozen on stage, instruments in hand, not knowing what to do. This wasn't in any playbook. This wasn't part of the show. The guards looked at each other, equally confused. Should they end the performance? Should they remove James from the facility? But the inmates knew exactly what to do. One by one they began to stand, not in aggression, not in protest, but in solidarity. Some were crying, some had their heads bowed, but all of them were standing for Marcus Coleman, standing for every mistake they'd made, standing for every moment of regret and pain they'd been carrying. And then something incredible happened. One inmate in the back started humming. Just a low, quiet hum. Another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, all 1,500 inmates were humming together. Humming. It's a man's world, the song that had broken through Marcus Coleman's walls. James lifted his head and heard them. Heard 1,500 convicted criminals, men society had written off. Men who'd done terrible things, all humming together in perfect broken harmony. He stood up, walked back to the microphone, and joined them, his voice cracking, tears still streaming. He sang that song from the beginning, and those 1,500 men sang it with him. Not just the words, but the emotion, the regret, the desperate hope for redemption that the song represented. When the song ended, James spoke directly to Marcus Coleman, who was still standing in the front row. "Brother, thank you for that letter. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for showing all of us that it's never too late to face what we've done and try to become better." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. James looked out at the rest of the inmates. Every man in this room has made mistakes, some bigger than others. But you're all still men. You all still have humanity, and as long as you're alive, you have a chance to do better, to be better. He turned to his band. Let's give them something uplifting. Let's remind them what joy feels like. For the next 20 minutes, James performed like he'd never performed before. Every song was a gift. Every note was a reminder that these men were still human beings deserving of music, of art, of connection. When the concert ended, the inmates didn't want to leave. Guards had to gently urge them toward the exits, and even then, they moved slowly, trying to hold on to the moment as long as possible. James stayed until every last inmate had left. Then he sat in that empty cafeteria with his band, exhausted emotionally and physically. "Boss," said Jimmy Nolan quietly, "that was the most important show we've ever done." James nodded. "Music isn't just entertainment, Jimmy. Sometimes it's redemption. Sometimes it's the thing that reminds people they're still human." 2 days later, James received a letter from Warden Mancusi. Marcus Coleman had used his one phone call that week to call Thomas Wright's widow. He'd apologized. He'd asked for her forgiveness, not expecting to receive it, but needing to offer it anyway. She'd listened. She'd cried. And while she didn't say she forgave him, she'd said something that Marcus later told the warden was even more important. "Thank you for finally seeing my husband as a person." James Brown kept Marcus Coleman's letter for the rest of his life. It was found in his personal effects after he died, folded carefully in a small wooden box, along with other items he treasured most. He never publicly discussed what happened at Sing Sing in detail. When asked about it in interviews, he'd simply say, "I performed at Sing Sing once. It changed me." The inmates who were there, though, they remembered. Over the years, as some of them were eventually released, they'd tell the story of the day James Brown came to prison and cried with them. The day they were reminded that they were still human beings capable of feeling, of regretting, of hoping for redemption. Music has power. Everyone knows that. But sometimes its power isn't in making people happy or getting them to dance. Sometimes its power is in breaking down the walls we build around our humanity, the walls that let us pretend we haven't caused pain, that we're beyond redemption, that we're not worthy of love or forgiveness. Marcus Coleman died in Sing Sing 12 years later. He never got out, but according to the prison records, in those 12 years he was a model prisoner. He mentored young inmates. He ran a reading program. He became, as much as anyone can behind bars, a force for good. And it all started with 3 sentences. 3 sentences that broke James Brown. 3 sentences that reminded 1,500 men that they were still human. If this story of redemption and humanity moved you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that we're all capable of change, no matter what we've done. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone took responsibility for their mistakes? Share your story in the comments, and hit that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the moments when music revealed the best and most human parts of us all.